record right now. So go ahead.
Oh, cool. I see. Oh, hello, everyone. Welcome to Monster Creation class today. We're going to learn how to create custom monsters, how to apply them to battlefield mechanics, whether it be scenario or basic monster creation for regular battle games. As well, we can use those skills as well to combine various monsters into a manual if you wish to create a manual. Um, Now, granted, it's always up to your Reeves champions and park leadership whether or not you can use custom monsters on your field or for specific scenarios. So it would be a great idea to talk to them before you go ahead and use any of these. Um, so we'll start here with some basic rules. Um, Remember that it's always the Reeves option to go ahead and let you use it or balance your monster for gameplay purposes. I know a lot of people love to play their creations, but sometimes you don't want to overwhelm things and totally throw any battle game or scenario off kilter because your monster decides to rule everything. Um, of course, basic rules, not taking deaths. They're generally separate classes unless there's a player class trait. Um, then, of course, you have the core rules of play, which will always supersede anything that you go ahead and you create or use. Um, with that out of the way, you have two kinds of monsters that pop up in your monster manual. You have your basic battle game monsters and your scenario monsters. The battle game monsters can be used in regular battle games or scenarios. Um, then you have your scenario monsters, which are only used in special scenarios and are usually included by your game designer. Usually, an example of your basic battle game monster would be goblins, centaurs, orcs. Um, an example of your scenario monster would be your dragons, your kraken, your green man, and all other sorts of powerful monsters that normally you would only have a couple of. So delving into your monster creation here, for those of you who are familiar with math, everything fits into a specific place to follow a specific formula. Monster creation follows under these guidelines, but with some exceptions. When you create your monster on paper, you should start with a basic outlined sheet. This would be the description of your monster, the distinguishing features of your monster or your garb, your requirements, whether or not they can play the monster if they're knight only, or if there are other specifications as far as that. You have type. Type gets a little more better. Those would be your creature types such as humanoid, animation, beast, etc. Those are going to be your ones that are going to be your genetic makeup of your monster at that point. After that, you have the level, which indicates the minimum level that you must be in the monster class in order to play the monster in regular battle games. The exception is that battle game designers can go ahead and allow you to play it regardless if they want, but only battle game monsters have the level. Scenario do not. After that, you have power rating. It is a scale of 1 to 10. It's kind of subjective. 1 being the lowest power, 10 being your highest power. An example would be a brownie would be on your scale of 1, and your Western or Eastern dragons would be on your scale of 10. After that, you have armor, which indicates the number of points and types of armor the monster has, whether this is natural, worn, invulnerability, or ancestral. That is where you'll indicate that at. After that, you have the weapons they can use. This is a bit different. If a category for the weapon is listed as single, the monster may only wield one of that weapon type at a time, though they can carry more. An example of this would be if single short would mean one. Now, normally in your rules of play, when it says short, that means you can wield any number of shorts, obviously one in each hand. But it's very specific for monster weapons. They will also tell you if the weapons are natural, which are a part of the monster, or if they're not natural, which means that they follow the standard rules for weapons. After that, you have abilities, which would be the various abilities it would have. Shadow, things from the rule book: shadow step, blink, tracking, true grit. And it would also have the option of having stuff from the monster manual as well, such as devour, player class, flight. And that's where you would put all the kind of the meat to the potatoes at that point. After that, you would have your vulnerabilities, which would be the limitations, restrictions, and weaknesses. Perfect example would be slow, where the monster can only walk and keep 1 foot on the ground at a time. Other examples would be spells that do altered effects. Extraplanar creatures that are banished are usually killed. Those would also be listed there. After that, they have a special notes section. It would be included if the monster has any unusual properties or rules that can affect the gameplay, such as giants. If you put special, you can make, if you make a giant super strong, you could possibly put can carry heavy objects by themselves, as long as they use 2 hands. And you can go ahead and put stuff like that in your special notes as well. And that is how you do your formatting with your list. After that, you fill in the blank. Once you follow the rules for specific things as you're putting stuff in, that is where your monster will come together. Your best place to start would be your type. What kind of creature are you creating? Your first type is an animation. It is usually composed or constructed of non-living materials: stone, metal, rock, but even things like, even outlandish things like coral reef. This is where you would have to follow the rules for animations. They are immune to command, death, and subdual. They have altered effect dispel, which makes them lost. Altered effect anti-magic, which makes them lost. And a version of anti-magic zone. Those are things that must go into your monster with no exception, because that is their typing. Your next example would be beast, which is non-humanoid creatures, often with more than 2 legs. Bear is a perfect example. Their weapons are always natural. This is a set in stone rule for their typing, and that's when you would go ahead and put in natural weapons for their typing. Your next would be botanical, which is plant or fungal. They are immune to command, death, and subdual. That is a must. That goes into your creature. Your other example is extraplanar, which is immunity to death, altered effect banish, which makes lost, and vulnerability of they may be targeted by banish as they were insubstantial. So that is stuff that as you're making these monsters for their typing, usually they will follow under certain typings such as that. The regular door monster manual will give you that list. Stuff not talked about would be Fae, humanoid, undead, multiplayer, and legendary. When you're creating your monster, make sure to follow those rules for your typing. Once you come up with your rules for your typing and your type, things start to build, things start to blend. Then you must decide whether or not you want to create a scenario monster or a battle game monster. Legendary typing usually follows under scenario monsters. It just makes the most sense. You have a legendary creature that has a legendary ability. Usually you're going to follow under scenario because they're a high-powered monster. Battle game monsters, obviously, you'll want to try to move towards a different typing, maybe. Your other thing that you have are monster races, which we're not going to get into today. That's a different subject, to where you're replacing your look the part bonus with a monster bonus. Given that this is classed as monster creation, this is a different subject altogether, but you can use your created monster to replace your look the part with permission. So we're going to go into the next section here for armor types. When creating your monster, you're going to have to decide what kind of armor type you want to give it. This is very subjective. This is your imagination. You have ancestral armor, magic armor, natural armor, and natural invulnerability, and of course, worn armor, which is as per the regular rules of play. When you create your monster, you want to come up with different ideas and things that would fit for the armor. Goblins, for example, can wear armor. They wouldn't really have natural armor unless your goblin is of a different custom variety that you come up with. An example would be, let's say your regular variety of goblins have worn armor. Now, let's just say that mountain goblins that you are customly creating live in a mountainous environment. The hardened magma around them that melts to their skin causes them to get some natural armor. So what you'll do is, if that is the route you wish to go for your monster, that's the description that you can give for them, and that's where they'll have the natural armor on top of their worn armor. You have, obviously, you have other things such as magic armor as well. You know, let's say that you have a creature that was created by magic. An example would be, let's say that there is a flamingo that you created from magic. And let's say that you want to protect your precious pink flamingo. You can go ahead and add magic armor to the flamingo because of its magical nature. It is all based on your imagination and all based on how you wish to tie it into your monster. It may take some tweaking around. It always does. Finding the right balance of what should be worn armor, non-worn armor, ancestral, etc. So we'll move on to the next one, which is weapon types. What type of weapon do you think that the creature will have? This gets interesting. You have your regular weapons as per the rules of play. An example would be is goblins will use pikes or short swords, if you wish, to go ahead and do their damage. But when you get into creatures like bears, or you get creatures with claws, let's say cats, that's where you get into your different weapon type for natural. These are a part of the monster. They're not going to go away. You're not declawing any cats. So that is where you're going to create your next part of your weapon type to figure out. If it is a beast, you are most likely going to go into the natural category. That means your claws, your tentacles, your vines. Other examples would be maybe sharp edges of different parts of your body, teeth. This is where you get into the nitty-gritty of weapon structure for your monster. If you have a monster that uses their teeth, is it a big monster? Is it a small monster? If it's a big one and it uses teeth, you might want to move into maybe a short category, because the teeth, let's say big monsters, the teeth are going to be like this big. The thing's going to like chomp into you, cut you in half, and you're done. If it's a smaller creature, let's say like, let's use the cat example again. You might want to give them a natural dagger, because that would be their teeth. If you don't want to go the teeth route, let's move on to the arms route, let's say our limbs. If it's a vine, or if it's a part of the body for most amorphous creatures, such as elementals, usually flails are going to be your natural weapon of choice for your custom monster. They're free form, they're gonna whip around, because it's essentially a water whip. It's an elemental, it's made of pure energy. When you move on to, let's say, bear claws, that's where you move into things like short swords or long swords, because bears have the long arms and they swipe at you. Another good example would be, let's say, rhinos. They have their horn sticking out. If it's a big rhino, let's say that their horn's really long, you could give them a great weapon or a spear for poke only. Or if it's a very weird rhino, let's say that their horns are made from swords, then you can go ahead and give them a great weapon that's natural for their horn. And it's all in the limits of your imagination at that point. From there, you have effect types. Your monster can have different effects. Cold, command, death, flame, lightning, magic, protection, sorcery, spirit, subdual. Some of these are from the core rules of play, which makes it easy. We know what spirit magic is, sorcery magic is, subdual magic is. But then you get into some neat effects such as cold and lightning. Flame, most people are familiar with the exception of some terrains that people usually don't use too much. Cold usually simulates any snow, ice, or freezing effect. Ice ball, icy blast. Or if you go beyond the limits of your imagination, hold person, grasping tentacles. As long as you make the effect as cold as indicated, you can add these to the effects of your monsters. Now, granted, they don't give any added effects or differences unless it is listed. Example, if you try to use a hold person as a cold effect on, let's say, a frost elemental that has immunity to cold, that's going to affect the monster based on that. But if you say, I'm going to use hold person, that's a cold effect on a regular warrior, it's not going to do anything added besides the effect of the spell. It's not going to go, oh, well, your whole body's frozen now after I use just hold person, because that's not how the base mechanics of the game work. It'll only affect things that are listed for the targets that you affect or yourself. Another example would be flame magic. There's an effect that heals you if you're hit by fire. Fireballs, or if there's lava, stuff like that. And usually it's altered effect or energy absorbed. And this stuff enters the element and does the specific effect. but it's only based on your character or your monster created. It's never going to affect anything else. Your fireball is not going to instantly kill someone who's still immune to flame, regardless if you're a fire elemental or not, because that's not how the base mechanics of the game work with it. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to abilities. This is always the toughest section for people to do. A lot of people will, when they create their monster, they want it to be the biggest thing. They want it to survive every encounter. They want to defeat every enemy. And you can't always be that number one person when you're doing your creation. You should think based on your imagination within reason. So when you're coming up with abilities, play test some abilities, see what works for you. Adding 18 or 19 abilities to your monster is going to be so confusing to keep track of. It's going to be so confusing for opponents or Reeves or battle game designers to figure out what you're even doing. Limit yourself to the amount of abilities, but don't limit the amount of your imagination. I'm not going to go over every monster ability available, but I will possibly give some examples for what you might want to do. For your elementals, your slimes, your blobs, you really want to go towards amorphous. All of the distinct parts of it are a single mass. There is an enchantment-based thing for those monsters that allow you to use that ability for your monster for roleplay purposes or for battle game purposes. Usually you'll want to place those type of creatures into amorphous, your balls, your free flow energy things, your husks. Those are the things you want to make amorphous. Your water creatures, you're going to want to make aquatic. Unless you're making a land shark, your shark's going to want aquatic, because otherwise you have a shark out of the water doing a little floppy thing out on the beach. You know, and we don't want to kill any sharks or kill any whales or fishes. Normally, you want to put the aquatic trait with those water creatures because it fits. You have different things such as corrosion. Monsters that you feel that would be able to corrode things would be a perfect example would be the rust monsters. Usually they're insectoids that crawl around in the ground and they just eat metal. That's all they want to do. They're hungry and they want some more iron in their diet. They're just gonna munch away. Maybe your slime monster, eats just about everything. So what you want to do is give it corrosion to go ahead and make it easier to get to the tasty flesh snack underneath the wrapper. You have your flying creatures that would get, of course, flight. You have additional things to give your flying creatures, such as aerial superiority or dive attack, which allows them to do different things while in the air, such as flying downwards quickly to fight some people and fly back up, kind of like hawks. Your hawks, eagles, giant raptors, fly down, swoop up, flying motion kind of thing. Then you have things like aerial superiority, which are allowed to use throwing weapons or projectiles. A perfect example of that would be let's say a giant bird that can lift up a boulder. They kind of fly by and just drop the boulder, right down on the enemy. That might be something that you would want to go with your monster. You have monsters that can be enchanted. Usually the enchantable monsters you'll want to leave towards humanoid, because bears are not going to really understand magic too much unless you specifically make a monster. Things that might have less intelligence or more of an animal instinct, probably might not want that. You have energy proof, which means they would be unaffected by certain effects such as cold or flame. You'll want to make your lightning elementals energy proof for lightning. Maybe if you have a super powerful fire elemental, you'll want to make them immune to cold because they can just melt the snow. You have other things that would fit into other things like holy weapons. You would obviously not give holy weapon to a demon. You would probably want to keep the roleplay flavor for that for things that would normally have holy weapons. Incorporeal is usually for your extraplanar creatures, your ghost, your voids, things that are going to come out and spook you like that. Like you're from Ghostbusters, they'll come through the wall and be like, hey, and then when you try to hit them, you can't hit them. And that's usually where you're going to want to put that. You have layers. Some monsters have layers, not layer, but layer as in a cave, like they're back, like a bat cave. Certain creatures like dragons usually have layers, and that's where they'll usually respawn or go back to do certain abilities. An easy thing is large. Your bigger creatures, your giants, they're going to be large. They're going to be able to do things like walk through the water. They're going to be able to hit flying creatures because they're right there in front of your face. You have other things like many-legged. Those abilities you'll want to put on things with multiple legs. Your centaurs, your spiders, your centipedes, usually some insectoids. If you really want to get into it, plants. You can give them multiple vine legs to kind of walk around, which sounds pretty scary to me. You have mighty, which usually those are going to be for your bigger things, your dragons, and let's say your super giants. Sheer numbers, which is going to be things that would be like a swarm, say like a swarm of bats, goblins. We'll use spiders again. I don't think anyone wants to see a bunch of spiders coming at them. It's pretty scary. You have small, which your small creatures can fit under that as well. Player class. Now you have a list of 6 vulnerabilities for your monsters. You have added effects, which when this thing happens with that specific spell, something else happens. It's a replacement effect. If you have altered effect fireball, you're going to do what the thing says instead of what fireball does. Example, if you were altered effect fireball heal, if you hit me with a fireball, I automatically get affected once as per the heal spell. And every time you hit me with a fireball, that is what the altered effect would happen. Usually that's where you'll want to place on your elementals, your voids, and other things that would basically fit with it. Obviously, no limits to the imagination. You can do other things as well, like your mountain goblins might have a lesser effect from fire. Let's say your frost dwarves would have a different effect from cold effects. So let's say altered effect icy blast. So you could make it to where let's say your snow dwarf, who's hit with an icy blast, is affected as per whole person instead of frozen, because they're used to the cold. So it's not going to affect them all the way, but it's going to affect them enough as they're trying to get through the frozen state. You have aversion, which means you need to stay 20 feet away from the thing. Usually aversion is for things that the monster would be afraid of. Skirks, which are the humanoid fish people. Usually they're afraid of magic. Anytime they see someone who's magical in nature, they book it. They don't have time for that. And usually you want to put those on the monsters that are scaredy cats of the specific thing. You can also have fun with it. You can make ghosts that are afraid of other ghosts. You can make your big bad creatures afraid of, let's say, like tiny animals, kind of like the elephants are afraid of mice. So when the elephant sees the mouse, they try to get away from it because they don't want nothing to do with it. You have beneficent, which means that you can't do anything to them unless they do something to you first. Usually angels have this effect. They won't really go and attack people unless they're attacked, but when they are attacked, they go and they beat them down. You have reversion. All active traits and abilities are ended. You lose your enchantments and you become suppressed. The example for this would be werewolves. If somebody cures you of your lycanthropy, you no longer are a werewolf. So you would lose those werewolf abilities and a lot of hair. Slow. Usually you have some creatures that would have this. An example of this would be, let's say, stone golems, automatons, things that have been resting for a long time and they take a while to move because they're restricted by things. Then you have susceptibility. It's attacks and abilities that would go through different things. Plant monsters would be a good example for this. If plant monsters are usually hit with fire, they're not going to like it. So it's going to go through their natural armor because it burns through because it's a plant and it's fire. There's other things that you can do for that as well. You can go the angel demon route to where you have demons who are susceptible to holy weapons. Let's say you have let's say a tree, and the tree is susceptible to poison or corruption. So you have stuff like that would follow in as well. As you're creating your monsters, that is kind of where you're going to want to input all of this knowledge and stuff from the monster manual to creating your monster. Let's see here. Before I go on, does anyone have any questions so far about the basic formatting, typings, or anything like that?
For the scale of what you're talking about, does this just apply to kingdom level or to local park level? And does it depend on the size of the park?
You can create anything you want to. At the end of the day, your battle game designer and your Reeve and usually your park monarchy are going to be the ones to determine whether or not you can use the monster, whether they want to balance it or not. And this could be for local level, this could be for kingdom level. And what you do is try not to overbear abilities based on your numbers. If you, let's say, example, you have a quest where you want them to get a treasure and you only have, let's say, 6 people. If it's a power scale of around 10, you're not going to want to throw those 6 people versus the one giant dragon. Unless you know that the skill set of the 6 people can beat the dragon. But if you have your really good fighter who knows how to playing your dragon, you don't want to put them against the 6 people because then the 6 people are just going to get trashed. So at the end of the day, it's based on what you know about your park and what you know about your players, and you adjust and you adapt, and then you throw it out there. And sometimes it takes a lot of play testing to go ahead and figure out what that balance might be. And once you figure out that balance, you can take whatever monsters you want. You could dumb down the dragon stats. You can take your base dragon and you can remove, let's say, like 4 or 5 abilities off the dragon. And you can throw it out there. And you can call it a different name. Let's say lesser dragon or lesser western dragon or whatever you want to do flavor of the month name wise. And that's the thing about monster creation. You can come up with your whole new animal, or you can take something that's already there. You can knock off a few ticks or add a few ticks or abilities and then play test it and then use it. You don't have to always create the fresh flavor of the month, because let's face it, we don't have enough animals out there in the world or enough monsters out there in the world, and we're going to run out eventually. But when you go ahead and you mix and match some stats over and you play with it, you'll find something that'll work for local and kingdom level. Any more questions?
I did want to ask a question. You talked about like the power level and reflecting how many people could fight a certain monster. Is there like, I guess to me, it seems like, so we had trouble in my group scaling the monster to the number of people we had to fight them, and finding like, say if we only have 1 or 2 people that can play a monster because we have so few people like to begin with, we were trying to figure out like, oh, is this monster too strong, or we just need to get like a good balance there? And is there a way to like in the rules that kind of explains, or that like shows like, a power level 6 monster is for 6 players to defeat or something like that? Is that how it works? Just curious.
In the previous manual, we had a power ratio where it would tell you if it was a 3-1, it would mean that the opposing team would need 3 people to counteract the 1 monster. We do not have that in this monster manual. It was always very subjective because you always have different factors such as skill level, whether it be fighting skill level with basic combat, or it would be ability skill level with casting speed or ability speed. And it's always subjective and too hard to go ahead and just determine, oh, well, this orc is 3 monsters to 1 monster. Because when you have the local fighter who's been fighting for like 10 years, your 3 people, depending, are probably not going to kill your 1 monster. Exceptions of, different abilities and such as that. My advice would be for play testing. You'll want to find out who your good fighters are. You'll want to find that balance. You'll want to find that stuff. But you can also counteract it with your game design. You can go ahead and do objective battle games instead. Your 1 monster can't be in 5 places at once. So what you can do is you can have your 1 monster hoarding, let's say, a pile of gold. You can have one of your players distract the monster if they need to, and have the other players grab the gold. It's all depending on your battle game design, your player skill set.
Thank you. I think, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And we really just have to do it to learn it, to get better at it, so that it's better in the future. It really seems like just a learning process.
Well, yeah, definitely, of course. And the best part about it is you keep playing regardless. Like, you need the test. Well, the fun part is you're playing. So everyone's going to be having a good time with it. But look towards battle game design. My advice would be look towards battle game design and move towards more objective style quests for your custom monsters and stuff, and go ahead and see what you can do from there.
Thank you.
Oh, no, not a problem. Let's see. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. I didn't even see. Devour. Okay, so Devour is an ability in the game here that they used to have a thing called Devour in the previous book. Wow, I'm looking through here and they don't have Devour anymore. But Devour used to be where roleplay wise, a monster would essentially swallow you whole, or would chew on you and swallow you. You would then become cursed, and you wouldn't be able to be resurrected at all, even through cursed. Like, you can't resurrect your buddy because he's literally digesting inside of the dragon. And that was a fun ability back in the day. And they had a dragon where you had to bring it back to the lair to devour it. So that was pretty fun. I would love to see it again. Obviously, you can use it as your monster for custom. Let's say even your cube. Just go ahead and have the cube devour. Like, after it kills you, just have it eat it. What do you do when the monster class is too overpowered or underpowered, or the monster isn't working out? You have several options that you can do. You can take away abilities. You can give abilities. You can give it more armor. You can give it less armor. You can have it do more damage, armor breaking, shield crushing. You can have it do less damage, which it just does base damage. What you do is, in your quest games, it's a lot easier to do this. Your scenario monsters. Communicate with your monster between a life, or even in a different room part, and go, hey, I noticed that you are totally stomping and annihilating these people. You can ask them to either tone down the skill level, possibly, for the fun of the quest, or if they don't want to do that, you can take away abilities, etc. And you can play test that as you're doing your game. And sometimes depends on who you're dealing with. There's some people who are like, oh, well, you're taking away blah, blah, blah. Why can't they just do better? And you, as the game designer or Reeve, have that power. Your goal is to make the game fun. So you can go ahead and alter things. You can change things. You can move things around. Try to communicate that change, but do it more in a roleplay aspect. Let's say the dragon is tired and the dragon moves slower. Or let's say the skill level goes down. You're like, okay, the dragon lost its fire breath because it can't use it as often, or people are tired of his bad breath. You know, whatever you want to do with it. And that's the kind of stuff that you can add flavor to your quest as well for your monster. How would you apply monster creation to smaller parks? Okay, so when you have smaller parks that are around 6 people, 10 people, etc., when you make your quest, you have several options. You can do big number group versus 1 or 2, or you can do small group versus small group, or you can adjust the numbers by a little. Let's say, you know, a little more here, a little less here, or a lot more here and just a little more here. And you should find monsters that would complement with it. Whether it be, example would be, you have pretty strong fighters on this half, let's say 5 here. And then you have 5 here. Let's say that you have way too strong fighters on your quester side. What you can do is you can bump 1 or 2 of the goblins to be orcs. Let's say orc chieftains. And then you can change your role play from there and go, okay, well, the role play is the orcs are using the goblins as slaves to go ahead and terrorize the town and get treasure. And that's how you can kind of bump up the different stats with that. Usually you'll want to stick to small group with maybe slight adjustments, or one big and then a bunch of small. Do you think the changes from the current monster manual to the previous version was for the better? With all changes with it, we have to adjust. We had a whole new animal to deal with. When you went from V7 to V8, you had different abilities, and we had to change it to fit to that style. The best part about it is it doesn't matter whether or not this was for the better or not. You can take any monster ability from the previous manuals or come up with something yourself, and you can create your monster. That's the fun part about monster creation. You pick parts from different spots and you just mash it. So if you really liked, let's say the example for Devour, if you really like Devour, you just transfer it over to V8 or the Door X10, and you go ahead and you do your write-up and you add it to your monster, whether it be altered effect or ability or any way that you want to do with that. And that's the fun part. You're just connecting and taking pieces to put your monster together. You can take pieces out, you can put pieces in, you can change how the pieces are, and it's kind of like building Legos. I mean, as long as you follow the base directions, the rest of it is just all fun customization. So you can put, let's say Carmen Sandiego Lego in your Lego Millennium Falcon. It's just imagination at that point. How important is it to have monster guard? It is highly important, but not all people can afford the luxury and extravagance of dragon wings, a dragon head, a dragon mouth, a dragon tail, etc. In our manual, we have a section that says if you really look like the monster, like really, really look like it, you don't have to wear the silver sash. You can take off the silver sash and not deal with it, because some of us hate sashes. But it's very important to have some distinction. Otherwise, based on the monster manual, you can't even play the monster if you don't have the base. So try at least to have the base requirements for guard. Try to make it simple if you can. Try to make it reasonable. Granted, an example we had was we had creatures that required you to be shirtless. Obviously, you don't want to see me shirtless any more than I ever have, so that kind of restricts, stuff like that. So you want to avoid things like that would work for all parties, no matter what gender they are. And you'll want to go ahead and remember that when you're doing your garb section for your custom monster. But it is highly important to have guard. If you're just walking around looking like a regular Joe Schmo, nobody's going to know what you are except for your sash. They're just going to go, oh, that's just a guy with a silver sash. But if you have elf ears on and some kind of like green leaf kind of logos and stuff, they're going to think that you're an elf. It's just how you present yourself is usually how you're going to look. Nobody's going to go to the guy who has blue jeans and a red t-shirt on and go, oh, it's a dragon. They're going to be like, oh, it's just Bob with his blue jeans and his red shirt. Like, you try to keep up the ambiance of the game. Like, it's super important. Do we have any more questions?
Just a heads up, this is the 10-minute warning. So
Gotcha.
10 minutes left, but you're in the next one, so yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Can we make Florida Man an Amtgard monster? Yes, you can. How you want to do it is going to be subjective, but of course you can do whatever you want with it because it's your monster. You can make him have a bunch of armor or no armor. You can give him armor breaking or flame blade or whatever you want to do. Favorite monster moment. There was an event back several years ago called Crystalline Chronicles in Winter's Edge. And when I first went there, I was like, okay, it's just going to be a bunch of people dressed up, whatever. And then I look in the corner and there's a dragon. And I'm like, okay, it's just a guy with a head. And then I noticed another player playing the wings, and another player playing the other wing, and another player playing the tail. And they made this one monster composed of 5 or 6 people. And they went around just yelling roar at everybody. Like anytime they would try to talk to it, it would just roar at them. And it would just, beat them with the stick. And then you had the head, which had a bucket of fireballs just going, yeah, I'm just going to cook you because I'm hungry. And everyone had to sit here and figure out what the hell they're doing with this monster, because you had like some of the best people on the different parts of this monster. And one random person comes up with a ukulele and just starts strumming the ukulele at the dragon. And the dragon just starts dancing around with it. And I'm like, we sat here for so long trying to kill this thing that we could have just stopped it with a musical instrument. And it's stuff like that makes me laugh like so much. And it just reminds me that the whole goal is to have fun. It's at the end of the day, it's just people having fun. And I'll always remember the 5-6 person dancing dragon that was totally annihilating us the entire event as just this dancing, bobbing dragon. And that for me was just one of my best moments. Yes. And it was great. Like that dragon. The other one was the earth elemental, where it was just trying to think if it was Kazan in the earth elemental costume. And it was so huge and the whole thing was just amazing. And it just had to be a guy had to sit there and count how much armor was being taken off of this elemental, because the person couldn't see, like they couldn't tell because it was just so huge and foam made. And it's yeah. And I remember if we didn't have the shield of the chosen, we would have been so dead at that point, and we just had to like take whacks at it and jump away from it and then come back in. It was kind of a weird dance at that point. The other one was not Winter's Edge related. Somebody at Keep a couple of keeps ago, all day at the event, they made a beholder, and this thing was taller than I am, and the mouth moved. They pressed the pedal and the mouth would move so it looked like it talked. It had the eye stalks coming out everywhere, and they had players who were acting as the attacking part of the eye stalks, like they were the other eye stalks. And I just remember walking up to this thing going, how are we going to beat this giant thing? And it was so cool because it had every little interaction piece ever. It had the flashing lights on the eye stalks. The main eye had, the blinking lights. He had a megaphone so he could, speak out louder. And it's always multi-part creatures or fully costumed creatures that always get me every time. And there's nothing better than when you have this big scary monster, and at the end of the day, you're just like, this thing's not so scary. And my Night Quest group that went with it, we were telling jokes and stuff, and essentially we were the only group to make the beholder laugh. And the guy in the costume with the mega horn trying to press the pedal like the Wizard of Oz, and the guy's like trying to laugh, and he was so good because he made the mouth move to make it laugh, even as he was sitting there trying to get composure. And it's always fun moments like that I'll remember. Not that, a big guy just came in and just killed everyone because he's a strong guy. It's the funny lame moments like that always make it so great. Oh, looks like we got only a couple minutes left here. So you have homework. Your goal is to create a custom monster of your own using different abilities, following the formatting for monsters. It doesn't matter what it is. You can copy it from somewhere. You can take something and remove abilities and add abilities. But your goal is to create that monster and then play that monster. Get the garb for it and go ahead and have fun with it. And I would really love personally to see any creations that you come up with. And the fun part about creating monsters is once you get enough monsters, you cram them together in a book and there's a monster manual. Just easy as that. It's just a bunch of custom monsters you come up with based on whatever theme or whatever you want. And you just smash it together. Any final questions? Sitting around the last minute here. No? All
What is
right.
the worst monster design you ever seen?
The worst monster design?
The worst monster design.
Take the white rabbit monster. Okay? The thing's way too powerful. It's got a list of abilities like that long. Okay? Take that monster, add about 6 more abilities to it, and then toss it into a group of new players. When you create a monster with so many abilities and you only use 3 of them, and you have a list of 86 more, it's so bad. And you're reading a novel at that point, because if you don't know what any of those abilities do, those 14 or 15 times you're going to bounce through the monster manual trying to figure out what they even do. So I created a joke monster based off of that, and I took the white rabbit, and all I did was I gave him tracking. I just gave him 1 extra ability, tracking, and I called it a bat rabbit or a babbit or something. I don't know. There's some kind of name. It's a bat and a rabbit, and it's just because there's nothing scarier than a white rabbit with sonar. But the white rabbit with like 6 or 7 added abilities will always be the worst created monster I've ever seen. Woohoo! Right. Looks like we're sitting on 2 o'clock.
All right, I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to unlive. See
All
you
right.
together in a few minutes.
All right.